Hey, warmer for the low! Welcome to lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Heaps with myself, Greg Heaps Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast, and we've got an excellent podcast for you as we've got another conference preview due up for you as we're taking a look at the Summit League today. There is nobody on the face of planet Earth that loves the Summit League, much like our good friend Sean Paul. He does great work over at the Field of 68. He's going to be joining me in segment number 2. We're going to be looking at all 9 teams, the nooks and crannies of it, the way that they are operating, who's all coming back, who's all going to be departing. So, going to have a good time there chatting with him about all that this conference has to offer in segment number 2. Here in the first segment, we're going to take a look at the styles of play, and we're going to take a look at the betting trends of the Summit League, and then in the final segment, give you guys my projector or finish for a Summit League that is very, very hard to project. So if you see your favorite team either a little bit higher or a little bit lower than expected, do note that like 1 through 8 is razor thin in this conference. So I will throw that out there right now. I'm going to take a stab at it and give you guys my projector or finish though. And if you do have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you have one of 2 ways we offer those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at @JNet_D1. Keep in mind, letters EM, they mean does not matter. So as per usual, please send these into the timeline. The other way is via an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. From there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. And since I'm doing a conference preview today, all the news and notes of college basketball from Saturday, if we did get any, because, well, we are now in the late summer months, and this is where things go a little bit more bare in terms of like player movement, what have you. Those are all going to be taken care of on the podcast tomorrow. So let's get down to it, and let's take a look at a Summit League in which it is all gas, no brakes. Lots of teams that put a lot of points up on the board, not a lot of defense being played. As a matter of fact, you take a look at just what we saw in the conference last year. You saw North Dakota State, South Dakota, and I mean, it's very hard to keep your South Dakotas and your North Dakotas all in line, but these 2 teams along with Denver, they all ranked 337th or worse in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. You had Oral Roberts not too far behind at 327th in the country in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis as well. North Dakota wasn't necessarily so savory on defense as well. They were well outside the top 200 with that regard as well. You just take a look up and down the boulevard in this conference and didn't have a lot of teams that played overly great defense. I will say the newcomer in St. Thomas who is really zigging while everyone else is zagging. You got some teams that they play fast, some teams that they play slow. St. Thomas out of the 362 D1 teams last season, they were 359th in terms of total possessions, and they were 127th in the country in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. Actually, a very solid effort from them on the defensive side of things. We've seen Kansas City make some inroads to be able to play a little bit of defense under Marvin Menzies. They're about 153rd in the country in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis, and these teams have been able to give you, I'm not going to call it great defense, but a morsel of defense, like South Dakota State. They were 189th last year in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. These were the teams that were able to really build themselves up and have a nice run of things in conference last season, as South Dakota State was your top team at 12-4 straight up in the conference. North Dakota, along with Kansas City, they went 10-6 in conference play. St. Mary's, they went 9-7 in conference play. And then South Dakota, Oral Roberts, Denver, 3 teams I mentioned being 320th or worse in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. They were your worst teams, and Oral Roberts 5-11 in conference play after they made a coaching change in the offseason. They lose Max Asmus, clearly a team that was in a little bit of rebuild mode, and it's always interesting to look at how North Dakota State operates because they're a team that very much sells out for conference play and non-conference play. Typically, they are in the toilet bowl, to say the least. And when it comes to just the overall tempo that you're going to be seeing in this conference as well, it very much does vary because I was mentioning it with St. Thomas, one of the slowest teams in all of college basketball, and you saw South Dakota State. Every year under Eric Henderson, it feels like they play a little bit of a different style. Last year, they really slowed it down to about 225th in the country in terms of total possessions per game. 2 to 3 years ago, they were playing much more up-tempo. They have decided that they're going to be going a little bit more low and slow. For South Dakota, they've been an interesting team over the last few seasons as well as they're up and down in terms of their tempo as well. 88th in the country in terms of total possessions per game. North Dakota State, you can always bank on them being a little bit of a slower team, 262nd in the country in terms of total possessions per game. North Dakota's a little bit of a chameleon. Sometimes they'll play fast, sometimes they'll play slow. 220th in terms of total possessions per game, and then you saw Denver really move it, 43rd in the country in terms of total possessions per game, and they were a team that was really leading the way in a conference that always has good three-point shooting. South Dakota State, time and time again, you're going to find them towards the top of college basketball in terms of their three-point shooting, but it was actually the other Dakota school in South Dakota who is your top three-point shooting team out there in this conference. 16th in the country in terms of their three-point shooting percentage. Actually, North Dakota State, they shot a little bit better. 13th in the country in terms of three-point shooting percentage. And you'll notice this, a lot of these teams, they shoot really well on the road as well. Like for North Dakota State, they shot 36.7% from three at home last year, 38.6% on the road. For South Dakota, 35% at home, 39.5% on the road last season. As a matter of fact, you want to go a little bit further out of your top four teams in terms of road three-point shooting percentage. South Dakota and North Dakota State, number 2 and number 4 respectively. So, that was a flamethrower to say the least. South Dakota State, they were number 37 in the country in terms of their three-point shooting percentage last year. So, even though they weren't the best team in the state of South Dakota in terms of their three-point shooting percentage, still a pretty rock-solid effort. And just all across the board, you're able to find a conference in general that has a bunch of teams that are able to knock down their threes. Kansas City is really that one team that they are a little bit more defense oriented. They were a little bit more into getting the ball down low. They were about 203rd in the country in terms of their three-point shooting percentage. Attempted a lot of threes, just didn't do necessarily the world's greatest job of being able to convert them, but they were much better on the glass. We'll get into that in a second. You also saw North Dakota in terms of their three-point shooting percentage be right around about 257th in the country, but they were able to do a solid job on defense. And Oral Roberts shot 37% from three on the road, 34.3% at home. Overall, once again, back in the top 100 with regards to their three-point shooting percentage. And going to be interesting to see what you get in terms of offensive rebounding in this conference as well, because that was something that eluded a lot of these teams as well. I just mentioned Oral Roberts, pretty solid three-point shooting team last year, but they rebounded 19.4% of their misses last year. That was 352nd in all of college basketball, and that was just a major theme that you saw in this conference. It's very much a make it or take it conference in that you've got a lot of teams that they just cast away from three-point range. North Dakota State, they rebounded 22.6% of their misses. That was 305th in all of college basketball. North Dakota was actually relatively respectable, 110th in the country with regards to percentage of their missed shots that they pulled in as an offensive rebound. But you saw out there in the great state of South Dakota, not a lot of second chances there. South Dakota State, 310th in the country in terms of percentage of missed shots that turned into an offensive rebound. South Dakota was 225th. St. Thomas 335th as well, but St. Thomas did a relatively good job on the turnover battle to be able to go above 500 as well, and that just causes for a lot of intrigue when it comes to the totals in the Summit League, as out there in the Summit League, you had quite a few teams go under, which is different than what we've seen in past years. Denver was just a flamethrower. Denver, 19 overs, 10 unders, and a push. South Dakota, 16 overs, 13 unders, and then a pair of teams that went one game above 500 to the over. North Dakota State, 15-14 to the over. South Dakota State, 16-15-1 to the over. But Oral Roberts with a very much slower style of play than what we've seen in past years. Russell Springman had the team well outside the top 225 in terms of total possessions per game. 11 overs, 16 unders, and a push. St. Thomas, 13 overs, 17 unders. And then you saw Kansas City and North Dakota both go 13 overs, 15 unders, and a push, with Nebraska Omaha being 14 overs to 15 unders. They're another team that have been going quite a bit slower in recent years as well. And it's really interesting in that you get a lot of conference games between these teams that they just all of a sudden slowed down. As Denver, they were once again able to be your top over team, 11 overs, 7 unders, and a push. But Oral Roberts in conference, 12 unders, 5 overs, and 1 push. You saw North Dakota State have 11 unders to 6 overs. Kansas City, 10 unders, 6 overs, and a push. South Dakota State, 11 unders, 7 overs, and a push. So things did get a little bit more slowed down because while a lot of these teams, they cast away from 3, they weren't necessarily getting a lot of possessions. Sans Denver was really looking to kick it up tempo. Meanwhile, these teams also were probably a little bit overvalued in terms of their totals because all but 2 teams in non-conference play played at least 54.5% of their games over the total. North Dakota State, 9 overs, 3 unders in non-conference play. South Dakota State, 9 overs, 4 unders. Denver, 8 overs, 3 unders in non-conference play. Oral Roberts, 6 overs, 4 unders. South Dakota along Kansas City, 7 overs and 5 unders. Your lone two teams that have more unders than overs in non-conference play. Omaha, 7 unders, 4 overs. St. Thomas, 8 unders to 4 overs. And then when it comes to against the spread trends in the Summit League, it was a very fascinating conference, to say the least, last season, and not a lot of profitability when it came to this conference, as St. Thomas was your best cover team, 17-12-1 against the spread. Kansas City was able to go 16-13 against the spread, and then had a pair of teams that went one game above 500, Nebraska, Omaha, 15-14 against the spread, South Dakota State, 16-15-1 against the spread, but North Dakota and South Dakota both go 14-15 against the spread. Denver even Steven, 14-14-2 against the spread. And then Oral Roberts, 12-16 against the spread. North Dakota State, 11-17-1 against the spread. But when you take a look at what these teams were able to do in non-conference play, it was very much a divide between the haves and the have-nots. Denver was able to go 6-3-2 against the spread in non-conference play because they were such big underdogs. St. Thomas was able to sneak up on a lot of people, 8-4 against the spread in non-conference play, while Omaha, they went 7-4 against the spread there. For UMKC, it was rough for them outside the conference, and then they found it in Summit League play, going 4-8 against the spread in non-conference play. North Dakota State, they always do a lot of tinkering in non-conference play. Not surprised here, 4-7-1 against the spread in non-conference play. And then South Dakota and North Dakota, 5-7 against the spread in non-conference play, while South Dakota State went 6-7. But when it comes to these teams being able to rise up as underdogs, that was something that you did want to take a look at in this conference, as this was very much a dog conference, as you had all but 3 teams be able to cover at least 52.9% of their games as an underdog, with St. Thomas leading the way, 7-1-1 against the spread as an underdog. From there, you had South Dakota State go 4-3 against the spread as a underdog. Denver 9-7-2 against the spread there. Omaha, Kansas City 11-9 against the spread, and then North Dakota went 9-8. While North Dakota State just did not play well in this role, 6-12-1 against the spread as an underdog. And then South Dakota, Oral Roberts, they were both one game below 500, with South Dakota 12-13 against the spread as an underdog, and Oral Roberts 7-8 against the spread as an underdog. But what else is of fascination as well is that this is a pretty spread out conference. You're going to be finding all these teams out there in the Dakotas going at it. You got a team in Minnesota in St. Thomas. You've also got a team out there in the great state of Colorado, and these teams actually played quite well on the road in terms of covering games, especially St. Thomas. 9-5-1 against the spread away from home. South Dakota State went 7-4 against the spread on the road. North Dakota 9-6 against the spread on the road. Omaha, UMKC both went 8-7 against the spread on the road. And South Dakota, they were at even Steven 7-7. You did see Denver go 5-9-1 against the spread on the road, and Oral Roberts and North Dakota State both 6-9 against the spread on the road, with North Dakota State throwing in there a push as well, as these teams had a little bit of a rough go of it, being able to defend home court really, other than UMKC. UMKC 7-3 against the spread at home. You saw St. Thomas, South Dakota both go 6-5 against the spread at home, but then all these other teams, it was a slog for them, especially having North Dakota State, North Dakota, and Oral Roberts go 5-6 against the spread at home, and South Dakota State go 4-6-1 against the spread at home. So certainly you were able to make a little bit of money on underdogs in this conference, and when it came to non-conference play, it did build up those totals a little bit too much for conference play, because while you get a lot of threes, you didn't necessarily get a lot of possessions. We will see if that's going to be the case once again this year, as we're going to be taking a look at all these teams for this upcoming season out there in the Summit League next with our good friend Sean Paul, who does such great work over at the Field of 68 right here on the flip side on Cusco Soups with myself, Greg Peterson, now part of the VC Family Podcast, the Summit League Conference Preview Edition. And we're back in lovely Las Vegas for Cusco Soups with myself, Greg Peterson, now part of the VC Family Podcast. It is the Summit League Conference Preview Edition, and who better to have on than a man that loves the Summit League much like myself. It is Sean Paul. He does such an amazing job over at the Field of 68 along with Action Network, taking a look at this wonderful game that we all know and love of college basketball. He is hard at work getting set for the upcoming season and doing a great job looking at the biggest of the big teams and the smallest of the small teams. You're able to follow him on Twitter /X at Sean Paul CBB. That is SEAN on Sean. And Sean, it's always great to get you aboard. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Greg. I'm very excited to talk some Summit League ball.
I am excited as well, and I am very excited to see what we are going to be getting in this league, as one of those teams that was very high-flying and high-scoring was Denver last year, but Tommy Bruner being out, who averaged 24 points per game, that led the team and quite frankly that led the country. That's going to be causing for a little bit of strife there. They lose each of their top three guys that were able to average double figures from a season ago. And question for you, Sean, is where does this team go without so much of their production from a team that last year, quite honestly, didn't win a lot of games, but they were fun and entertaining to watch?
Yeah, I would have hoped they did a little bit more in the portal because, like you said, losing Toku Dynamo along with Tommy Bruner and Jackson Brenchley, like that was their only three double-digit scores per game last year, and nobody else averaged more than 6.6 points per game. So they lost a lot of what was there. They're going to need DeAndre Craig to really make a step up this season. In his sophomore campaign. I'm guessing that's probably what they're hoping for based on not adding a ton in the guard department via the portal. They have Isaiah Adu-Ankara back. He should be a solid floor-stretching piece at the 4. They bring in a lot of freshmen, though. 5 new freshmen. Maybe there's something there, but it's definitely going to be a down season for Denver compared to what we saw a season ago, especially considering they had the top scorer in college basketball. They didn't defend anything last year. They were able to make a run to the conference tournament title game, lost by 8 points to South Dakota State, but they're going to need someone to really step up this year that we probably don't know a ton about at this point. Like Tommy Bruner was an established veteran. Dynamo was already an established, really good player. I don't think we know who that guy is going to be unless it's DeAndre Craig.
Yeah, DeAndre Craig is probably going to be able to give this team a little bit of production, but man, do you think that might be a little bit rough for them moving forward? And this team, I think, loses quite a bit as well because with North Dakota, they're going to be bringing back some of those ancillary pieces from a season ago. They do bring back a lot of the backcourt, but in terms of this North Dakota team, I really feel like they had some heart and soul pieces that were able to do so much that are going to now no longer be with them. And I'm looking at Tyree Iheanacho, what he was able to do with like 14 points, 5 boards, just a complete stat sheet stuff for BJ Omad. Moves on to greener passages as well. You've got guys like Mark Kulajovic, Tyson, Eaglestaff, guys like this, but missing those two guys in Iheanacho and Omad, I think are going to be big.
For sure, Omot is a legitimately high major talented player. Like he's got that athleticism, that shooting ability. He had a big season. But I'm looking at Trayson Eaglestaff returning. I think he could be in for another really big season. Eli King is a stabilizer at that point guard spot. They returned some other pieces in that front court. I don't know if this is really a contender to win the conference, but this is going to be a down Summit League this year based on what the rosters look like right now. So just returning your 2 starting guards could be good enough besides Iheanacho for them to be a real contender to begin the Summit League season. Maybe like a top 4, top 5 finish. They're not going to be dominant by any means, but I could see them being decent.
With North Dakota, I feel like they're just sort of in a big giant hodgepodge in that middle of the Summit League where you've got a clear bottom and from there it's just all sort of jumbled up. As joining me on the show, we do have one of our good friends in Sean Paul joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops for the Summit League Conference Preview Edition. And one of the teams I think is also going to be interesting is Omaha because Frankie Fiddler, he was their top scorer from a season ago. He now moves on to Michigan State. Shout out to Michigan State for actually utilizing the transfer portal for someone, but they do return J.J. White, guy that has been able to dole out the ball quite well over the last few years. You've got someone like a Tony Osborne who's able to shoot it from 3. Markel Sutton is able to give the team some rebounding, and with Fiddler being out, that's massive, but they do return a lot of those ancillary pieces that was a part of a team last season that has been brought in by Chris Crutchfield, who's been able to sort of change the culture over there at Omaha.
Yeah, they brought in a pair of guys from North Dakota State who are very familiar with the conference, and Josh Street and Lance Waddles. Those are 2 guys that could contribute a little bit here. They're going to need the guys who are returning to make a big step up there. You're looking at Tony Osborne, you're looking at J.J. White, you're looking at Markel Sutton. You need all 3 of those guys to make solid steps up this season and help replace some of that production that Frankie Fiddler had last season. You're not going to replace him on a pure talent and scoring standpoint because he's at Michigan State for a reason. Like, he's got that level of talent. You don't really replace that kind of guy in the Summit League, but if enough pieces can combine to replace what Frankie Fiddler did, then Omaha could be in a decent position. Returning a lot says a lot in mid-major basketball nowadays, and I think Omaha could be in decent shape to be a top 5, 6 team in the conference this year.
Yep, I'm right there with you. I do think that they have the propensity to be able to take some strides forward. And then when it comes to this bunch, the front court is going to be lacking. I really like the back court, though. As for North Dakota State, the old Bison, they're bringing in Brendan Watkins, a nice double-figure scorer over at VMI. They lose Bowden Scunberg, they lose Andrew Morgan, but Jakari White, to Javius Miller, Damari Wheeler Thompson, these are all guys that are going to be returning for them. No doubt, Noah Federson, he's 6'10". He's going to need to take some strides forward down low, but I look at this backcourt and I really like what it provides. The question is, are they going to be able to get any sort of rebounding?
I think a lot of that rebounding could come from Noah Federson. If we're looking at a team that could end up being the favorites in the Summit League, I'm looking right at North Dakota State. Obviously, their longtime pedigree of being a very competitive winning team in the conference is worth something, in my opinion. You're losing Andrew Morgan. He's going to be a big loss, but I don't know how big of a loss it'll end up being because Noah Federson is a really good player. He averaged 7.4 points, 4 rebounds as a freshman. He has the ability to step out and hit a three, shot 38.9% from three last year on just under 2 3-point attempts per game, and he got better throughout the year. Like, we're looking at a guy early in the year, he was playing decent minutes. We're looking at like 11 to 15 minutes, but near the end of the season, we're looking at this dude playing 30-plus minutes. His ability to be a version of what Rocky Cruiser was and almost in a way what Andrew Morgan was for a number of years is pretty impressive. Like, he has a skill set of a little bit of both of them, in my opinion, but the way Cruiser is able to shoot it, and that mirrors more of what Federson is able to do. It wouldn't surprise me if he ends up being the number one breakout player in the Summit League this year. Just the way he was able to impress as a freshman, he's going to be in for a huge sophomore year, and really, North Dakota State's like a factory of developing really solid bigs at this point. He might end up transferring in a year or two, but that's just kind of the world we are in college basketball. You never know what's going to happen, but he's going to be an absolute stud this year at North Dakota State.
Yep, absolutely. With North Dakota State, love this backcourt. Again, few question marks in terms of what they're going to be able to get down low. But David Richmond, he knows what he's doing as a coach. This team has made the NCAA tournament in the past, and this is a coach that has made the NCAA tournament as well. Never really was fond from over at UNLV, but Kansas City took some nice strides forward last season, and they're going to be returning a guy that they thought was going to be making some big contributions for them last year. Anderson Kopp went out after 10 games where he was really that do-it-all sort of player. He now teams up with Jamar Brown, who was able to give the team just so much in terms of 15 points, 6 boards per contest. Cameron Foss is a nice three-point shooter. Again, a little bit of question marks in terms of size, but it's not like they had a whole bunch of size last year, as a lot of their big men were right around about 6'7". What are your thoughts on a UMKC team that's a little bit unconventional, but they find a way to be able to get production and they find a way to be able to get the job done?
To me, it's really interesting. Like, we talked about a team in Denver earlier who was more up-tempo. They didn't defend anything, and they were just really solid offensively. They were looking to run and gun. That's the exact opposite of what UMKC is. They shot a lot of threes, but they ranked 242nd adjusted tempo on KenPom. They were 265th in offensive efficiency, and they were 156th in defensive efficiency, which is as elite as you'll find in the Summit League. It's not getting much better than that. And they were really good at rebounding. They were 39th in defensive rebounding percentage and top 100 in offensive rebounding percentage. Like, they were just really solid at those kind of things, doing the extra effort things that a lot of other teams can't do, and they had a lot of depth last year. Jamar Brown, though, was an absolute stud, 15 points per game. He's going to continue to be their best player. It wouldn't surprise me if Kansas City just keeps going, because I had zero expectations for this team being good last year, and they managed to win 10 games in conference play. I thought they would be really bad, but obviously I was wrong. They add a couple JUCO guys with Devontae Hall, Gob. Those should be interesting pieces in the backcourt next to Jamar Brown. I think we're looking at a top 3 team here in the preseason probably. It's just a lot different from what we're seeing typically from Summit League teams, like the rebounding, the defensive stuff. That's not what you usually get from a Summit League team, so it looks a lot different, and I think that's part of what makes them good because they're so consistent in those little things that a lot of other teams don't really do.
Now, I have to say, Gob, the most delicious player in all of college basketball, but I'm right there with you. I thought that they did a good job hitting the JUCO level, being able to bring in a few guys. They return a lot of production from last year. It's just sort of how you think that style is going to play with everyone else as where you project them in the Summit League. As Sean Paul, who does such great work over at the Field 68, you want to be right here on Coast to Coast Hoops for the Summit League Conference Preview Edition. And for St. Thomas, ever since coming up from the D3 level, they have really been able to do a nice job making this jump. Not often that you see a team be able to jump 2 full levels and in year number 3 be able to win 20 games. That's exactly what they did last year, but I do fear that they lose quite a bit from last year. Raheem Anthony, Parker Jorkland, these guys were tremendous for them. They are going to be returning someone in Kendall Blue, who is a nice double figure scorer, and they've never had like that one super rebounder or anything like that. As a matter of fact, nobody had more than 5 rebounds per game for the team last season. But I do have a little bit of pause with this team with losing Anthony and Jorklin, in that these were guys that were heart and soul pieces of that team from a season ago.
Yeah, I mean, there's one thing about St. Thomas that I kind of trust at this point is that they're going to be able to shoot the ball at a pretty high level. All 3 of their years at the D1 level, they've shot above 34% from 3, which is pretty solid. They've shot a ton of threes every single year, so that's not going to change. I think that's just kind of what we're coming to expect from Johnny Tower and his squad. Like, they're going to shoot a lot of threes, and honestly, if you hit enough of them, you're probably going to win that game. That's just kind of how it goes, especially in the Summit League, and especially with the pace they play. They are one of these slowest tempo teams in college basketball, at least last year, and they've typically been pretty slow in general, so that's probably not going to change either. They added Rich Byrie from Green Bay, who I think should be a nice piece coming in. Drake Dobbs coming back from, he was originally at Liberty. Kendall Blue coming back. Jermaine Coleman coming in from Fort Wayne, and then they had 5 freshmen. Like, it's tough to really know what you're going to get from some of these freshmen because there's just not a lot out there about a lot of freshmen in the Summit League. But if some of these freshmen hit, then St. Thomas could be a pretty solid team. They could be a team that has a lot of ebbs and flows in my eyes because of their three-point shooting. Some games it's going to be there, and some games it's not. But ultimately, they're going to be able to sneak out some wins because that shooting will probably be there.
Absolutely. And you know that St. Thomas is going to zag while everyone else zigs. One of the slowest teams in all of college basketball last year, if you take a look at total possessions per game. And then I take a look at this team. They were at the bottom of the Summit League last year, and they have a coach with the last name Peterson. That's always nice, and Eric Peterson. But for South Dakota, they, in my opinion, bring back quite a bit of nice production. Caleb Stewart, 15.5 point per game scorer last season, that was out of the fold for a few games last year. You could tell that he was playing through injury a little bit throughout the season, but Paul Bruns has been around the conference. I believe he began his career over at North Dakota. Max Burchill is back. They bring in a few guys via the transfer portal. I always say his last name wrong, but Lahat Thione, he was able to be a double-double machine for the team. He's now out, but I take a look at South Dakota, bringing back quite a few nice top-flight scores from season ago, and I do think that there's some upside with this team.
I agree, but they need to defend, and that's just like they need to defend anything. They were 356 in defensive efficiency last year. They forced turnovers on 11% of possessions. That was 361st. Not quite last, but we're right about there. Might as well be dead last. But they need to get some production from some of these guys they added on the defensive end. That's where a guy like Chase Forte steps in from Northwestern State. He's that kind of guy that's going to lock in and just be a big-time defender. He was really solid last year for Northwestern State, even though that team didn't put up any huge numbers and didn't make the NCAA tournament. He was a big piece for them. Quandre Bullock coming in, started his career at Louisiana Tech just like Caleb Stewart did. Bullock went to Niagara last year. But again, Caleb Stewart's that kind of guy. Like, we saw what he could do in that game against Denver, where him and Tommy Bruner doled it out for multiple overtimes. 111-110 final. Caleb Stewart scored 44 points. Not quite 46 like Tommy Bruner, and ultimately they lost by 1, so I guess those 2 points by Bruner ended up being pretty big. But Caleb Stewart can really score. I'd just like to see him take like 20 shots a game, average 22 points. I think that's really what this team needs. But you're getting Javon Hill back too. He had a really solid season last year. Losing Lahat Chun and Boston Holt, those are 2 guys that are going to be tough to replace, especially in the rebounding department. But they're going to need some guys like Cameron Fenns, Ashton Smith, and Javon Hill to really help replace that. I could see this team being really good, though. When you have a guy like Caleb Stewart, you have a couple other pieces who should be solid contributors, then you're probably going to win a fair amount of games in the Summit League.
Yep, absolutely. And I think that this is going to be a fun team to watch, and that I think that they're going to be putting up some points, and they're certainly going to be giving up quite a few points as well. And this was an underachievement last year when we saw Oral Roberts ties South Dakota for dead last in the conference in year number 1 under Russell Springman. Now, for Russell Springman, he's going to be bringing back a few of the top flight guys from a season ago. Kareem Thompson is really one of the last holdovers from that team that was able to make the Sweet 16 a few seasons ago. Sir Isaac Heron is back. Isaac McBride is back. And I do think that there's a little bit of upside with Carlos Rosario coming over. He began his career over at Washington State. He's never really found his footing. He's going to be able to help out down low. But for Oral Roberts, This is another one of those teams that they need to defend anything as well. Just because you play slowly doesn't mean that you play good defense. They were awful on defense last season, and someone needs to tell them to grab a rebound.
Yeah, I think it was going to be a bit of a transition, even though Russell Springman is on staff with Paul Mills. It was going to look a lot different because he's not going to coach the exact same way, and there is no Max Asmus. Like, Isaac McBride is great, but Isaac McBride with Max Asmus is even better, and they didn't have Asmus last year. Isaac McBride never left the floor last year. He had the highest minute percentage in the country, and he's a big-time scorer. He's the Summit League preseason player of the year, in my opinion. If he ends up being the top scorer in the country, that wouldn't surprise me. You're losing Jalen Bedford, who transferred to UNLV. That's a pretty big hit, but I do like adding Sam Alajiki from Rice, average 4.5 points per game. He's athletic. He can shoot it. He's going to slide nicely at the 4, maybe next to Josh Jones at the 5, a guy who was a freshman a season ago. Didn't have a great season, but as a sophomore, I'm expecting more from him. Sir Isaac Heron, I'm sure, will continue to play a decent-sized role, but Alajiki to me is really the key because of that upside. I mean, this is a guy, I originally liked him at Cal, and he just never quite got it going on some bad Cal teams. Transfers last year to Rice, and that team wasn't very good either, so he's really going to have to step it up this year. I could see this team being solid, though. I mean, I know I've said it about South Dakota, but there's a lot to like here with Isaac McBride and some of the other pieces to where I could see Oral Roberts being much improved. But naturally, that 5-11 regular season finish in the Summit League is enough to scare some people away, and I understand it. But with what they return and some of the pieces they add, I'd be surprised if this isn't a top 4 team in the league.
With Oral Roberts, it certainly is going to be interesting because if they could just grab a few rebounds, I feel like there's so much there in terms of the three-point shooting that you're alluding to. Perhaps Rosario is going to be able to help out with that a little bit. Alajiki, I think that there's some upside there, but clearly with the transition from Paul Mills, it certainly has been a little bit tougher than expected, and this is going to be quite a transition as well. South Dakota State, once again, they were on top of the conference during the regular season, and if you're looking at the Ric Flair mentality, in order to be the man, you got to beat the man, and they have been the man in the Summit League for the last decade or so, but now you lose Zeke Mayo, but not just that, you lose Charlie Easley, you lose William Kyle, you lose so much from a season ago. Now Kellen Gary is averaging about 7.5 points per game. He's one of the top returners from a season ago. They bring in Isaac Lindsey, who is glued to the bench over at Wisconsin from a few seasons ago, and now they're probably going to be looking to go a little bit bigger with likes of Matthew Moores, Nate Barnhart back in the lineup after they were ancillary pieces from a season ago. Where does this South Dakota State team that year in and year out is always at the top of the Summit League go after they lose so much production from a season ago?
Yeah, I mean, Zeke Mayo was awesome, and when Zeke Mayo took the reins from Baylor Shireman, like, we knew that was going to be an easy transition because of how good he was as a freshman behind Shireman, and obviously Shireman went to Creighton, did some great things there, but that South Dakota State team was a 13 seed in the tournament. They won 30 games. The following year, they won 19 games in 2022, 2023. They weren't bad, but they were never that kind of team where you're like, okay, this team is going to dethrone Oral Roberts, who just dominated everybody in conference play that year. And then last year it was South Dakota State, who was really impressive, only losing 4 conference games before losing to Iowa State in the NCAA tournament. But you're losing Zeke Mayo, and I don't really know who that guy is that's supposed to replace him. Maybe it's Kalen Gary, but they might have to play differently this year. It might be a lot of Nate Barnhart and Oscar Clough, who was at Washington State a season ago and started a lot of games last year for them, a really good Washington State team who made it to the round of 32. Maybe those two guys start together and they go with a more Twin Towers approach in that interior. Barnhart is more of a shooter, and Clough, who's more of that bigger guy who can rebound, defend a little bit. He's quick on his feet, and they did a lot of dribble handoff stuff last year at Washington State, and he was really solid in that area, so it wouldn't surprise me if he did some of that stuff at South Dakota State as well. But they're going to need some of these guards to really step up, and that's really been the bread and butter for South Dakota State over the years. They're going to need some of these guys to step up. Maybe it's some of these freshmen. They had 5 freshmen. Stoney Hadnot seems like a solid piece from what I've seen. Maybe he ends up being a really good player for South Dakota State, but I'm guessing some of these freshmen will have to play big minutes given what's there in the backcourt for the Jackrabbits. They're probably a top 3 team in the league this year. But again, we're looking at a really down Summit League. Like, we knew South Dakota State would be the best team in the league last year. We knew Oral Roberts would be the best team in the league 2 years ago. I have no idea who the best team in this league is right now. I really don't. It's South Dakota State, South Dakota, or Oral Roberts probably. Maybe Kansas City. But I don't think there's a very big gap between any of them. I think it's super tight.
Yep, I think so as well, and I think that it is going to be a fun Summit League, really. other than Denver, I could see like any of these teams being able to rise up towards the top of the conference. And this is going to be a tough one for me to pick my projector order finish of. But you, Sean, helped me out so much with your intel in terms of making that process a little bit easier for me. You do such great work over at the Field of 68. You're just a wealth of mid-major college basketball knowledge in general. You're doing a great job getting set for the upcoming season. So let the good people at home know it's all on tap for you and how people can follow along on social media and other platforms.
Yeah, you can follow me on Twitter at SeanPaulCBB. You'll see all my college basketball stuff there and maybe an occasional baseball tweet, but probably not. I'll just talk to myself about those more than likely. But you'll definitely see some basketball stuff.
Well, I've got you covered with the baseball betting show every single day, so I have no fear there, but Shawnee certainly has you covered with so much great college basketball intel every single time he joins me on this podcast, lends such great insights, and did so once again today. So big thanks to Sean for joining me on Cuts Cuts Hoops, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast, and this is the conference preview edition for the Summit League. So coming up next, I give you my projector finish for the Summit League. And we're back in lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. Always great to be able to get Sean Paul aboard. He does an amazing job taking a look at this great game of college basketball over at Action Network, along with the Field of 68. Just a mid-major master that absolutely loves this conference. He does such a great job looking at all 364 D1 teams every single time he joins me. Makes us so much smarter and did so once again today. So a big thanks to Sean for joining me in the last segment. Now it is that time of the podcast. I give you my projector finish for the Summit League, and because I am doing a conference preview today, that means that the news and notes of college basketball from the last 48 hours are going to be summed up on the podcast tomorrow. Have no fear. If anything happened on Saturday, that is not going to be neglected, and we do have ourselves a little bit of a, shall we say, shortage of news that is happening right now in college basketball, with the transfer portal very much being dead and teams getting set for the upcoming season, just doing some summer workouts. So it is a good time for some of these conference previews and a good time to pick dead last, who I think is going to be at the bottom of the Summit League. And at number 9, we've got Denver. And for Denver, they lose Tommy Bruner, who averaged 24 points per game last season, was the heart and soul of this team, and led college basketball in scoring. But not only that, they lose scorers number 2 and number 3 in Tuki Tanamo along Jackson Brenchley. Both of these guys being out of the fold makes this just a disaster. For Denver, they do have DeAndre Craig back, who was able to give the team 6.5 points, 2.5 assists per game. And then Isaiah Carr was able to lead the team in blocks last year with 1.8 blocks per game for a team that was 350th in opponent field goal shooting percentage last year. Pedro Lopez Savinte, hopefully I said that correctly, shot about 34.5% from three-point range, and is the lone starter returning for a unit that was 15th in terms of fewest turnovers on a per-possession basis. They do bring in a top 50 guy, according to JUCORecruiting.com, from the junior college level, Nick Shogbono. He was able to be very good with 21.5 points per contest at McClellan College last season, but when you lose all this production from Bruner, Tanamo, Brenchley, yeah, I think that it's going to be a rough year for Denver. So at number 9 in my projector finish, I'm going to be going Denver. At number 8 in my projector finish, I'm going to be going with North Dakota. For North Dakota, the team went 10-6 in conference last year, and that was their best season in 6 years out there in the Summit League, so they were able to create some nice inroads there, but I do think that's going to be a little bit tumultuous for them because they do lose quite a bit of that production that they did have from a season ago. They were able to get some nice production from Tyree Iheanacho, who I thought was just so versatile and was really the heart and soul of this team. 14.5 points, 5 boards, 4 assists per contest. You lose your top scorer in BJ Omot. That means that they're going to be looking to Amar Kilahovic, who was able to give the team 8.5 points, 8.5 rebounds per game, and did shoot 45.5% from three-point range last season to be able to lead the way. They're really going to need Eli King to step up. He began his career over at Iowa State, was a part-time starter last year. That did give the team a little bit of versatility, like 7 points, 4 boards, a steal and a half per contest. So, he's able to give you a little bit of this and that, but this is still one of the more awful defenses that you're going to find in all of college basketball. Ding Meyer, he was limited to just 13 games last season, so he should be able to help things out a little bit. They bring in a nice junior college transfer that I like as well. Over at Tyler Junior College, you had Darius Woodson be able to log about 14 points per contest, shot 37.5% 40% from three-point range. That'll help out a team that wasn't necessarily amazing with their three-point shooting, even though Kilo Jovic was able to be a nice three-point shooter. Overall, this team was outside the top 250 in terms of their three-point shooting percentage, and they were either last or second to last in terms of total block shots last season as well. They really didn't have a lot of interior defense, and that's something that has to be very, very worried about this North Dakota team. So, as a result, I do have them at number 8 in terms of my projector finish. At number 7, I have Omaha here. I put Omaha here because even though they do lose Frankie Fiddler, and that is going to be a massive loss for them. For Mr. Fiddler, he did an incredible job being able to supply the team with 20 points per contest. I believe he's now on to Michigan State, so good on him. You do return Markel Sutton, and I like Markel Sutton. He was able to give the team 12.5 points, 6.5 boards. Not a guy that's really going to light it up from 3, and there's a big void in terms of three-point shooting that is left with Frankie Fiddler being out. He was one of their main guys to be able to pop it from three-point range. You did have Tony Osborne, who was able to take about 5 threes per contest, shot about 35% from 3, 8 points per contest as a guy that started most of the games for the team 8 seasons ago, so that's something that does provide a little bit of upside, but I like the fact that J.J. White is back. He gave the team 8.5 points, 3 assists per contest last season, but he was able to give out closer to about 3.5 assists per game in the final 15 games last season. Grant Stubblefield shot about 42.5% from three-point range last season. You bring back Isaac Okinkane, hopefully I said that correctly, 6'8" combo player who was over at Lindenwood last year, 5.5 points, 4 boards per contest. Joshua Strait, he's coming in after he was glued to the bench over at North Dakota State last season. He brings a nice 6'8" frame, and the team led the country in free throws attempts per offensive play at home last season, 10th overall in this category in terms of both of their home and road games. They were 300th in terms of opponent's three-point shooting percentage. That's going to be a little bit of an issue, but bringing back White, bringing back Sutton, a pair of rock-solid starters, and Tony Osborne, a guy that's able to shoot it from 3, I think that that'll keep this team from the complete cellar. So I do have Omaha at number 7 in terms of my projector finish. At number 6, I'm going to go with Oral Roberts. And honestly, this would be better than what Oral Roberts did last season. Oral Roberts was tied with South Dakota at dead last in the conference last year. Russell Springman, I just don't think is necessarily cut out to be a coach. This was just not good, to say the least. But they do return quite a few of their minutes from a season ago, being able to bring back Kareem Thompson, who's really the lone holdover from that team that was able to make the Sweet 16 a few seasons ago. That's going to be big. Last season shot about 37% from 3, 12.5 points per game. And you're still staring at an Oral Roberts team that's able to pop it from three-point range, but you can tell that with Paul Mills being out and him now coaching over at Wichita State, has really put this team in a little bit of a sticky sort of bind. And for this Oral Roberts team, it's going to be very interesting to see what they're going to be able to do moving forward with a lot of moving pieces, with this being a team that's going to be probably dominated once again by Isaac McBride, a guy that was able to give the team 20 points per contest, shot 39.5% from three-point range. Always do like what he's able to provide for this team, but for Oral Roberts, they just really lack any sort of rebounding whatsoever. Sam Alajiki is going to be coming in after he spent some time at California as a bit of a starter. He's sort of bounced around the country. And Carlos Rosario is someone that began his career over at Washington State, could never really find his footing over there or with Drake, but he's someone that I think could be able to come in, be able to give the team some nice minutes. Manthak Majak, he's someone that stands 7'3", just is one of those raw upside sort of guys that was over at UMass this last season, was someone that had a few suitors for him in terms of being able to get him on, but you do lose pretty much everything other than Thompson along with McBride from a season ago. Sir Isaac Heron is someone that is right around about 6'9". He's able to pop it from three-point range as well, but this defense was one of the most leaky in all of college basketball last season. They were 318th in opponent's three-point shooting percentage last season. They got completely dominated on the glass. They have no way of being able to get a second chance opportunity. I think that that is going to be their downfall, and I think that that's going to hold them back in this conference. I've got Oral Roberts as a result. Number 6 in my projector finish. And number 5, I'm going to be going with South Dakota. South Dakota actually tied for dead last in the conference along with Oral Roberts a season ago, but for South Dakota, they were dealing with a few injuries a season ago. You've now got Caleb Stewart back, who logged 15.5 points per contest, shot 42.5% from three-point range, and I like Paul Bruns. Paul Bruns is a guy that was able to log about 10 points per contest. He spent a lot of time in this conference. I believe that he began his career over at North Dakota bringing in Keandre Bullock. Should be able to help this team in terms of their outside shooting as well, averaging 8.5 points per contest on 50% three-point shooting at Niagara a season ago. Max Burchill, he was able to give the team about 42% from three-point range for a team that overall was 16th in three-point shooting percentage last season, and they made 39.5% of their threes on the road last season. That was second in all of college basketball. They are also going to be bringing in Ashton Smith, who was logging about 2.5 points per contest over at Oral Roberts after starting his career at Texas A&M. A little bit of upside there. Isaac Bruns, I'm pretty sure that is of relation to Paul Bruns. He's going to be coming in as well, and he's going to look to help out a team that was 361st in terms of turnovers per possession and 23rd in opponent's three-point shooting percentage last season, ballooning to 348th on the road. So certainly the defense is lacking with South Dakota, but a clean bill of health for Caleb Stewart and being able to bring back a lot of the top flight guys and bringing in Chase Forte, who was nice over at Northwestern State, who was able to log about 10 points, doled out nearly 4 assists, 2 steals per contest. I think that there's some real upside there. So do have South Dakota at number 5 in terms of my projector finish. At number 4, I'm going to be going with the Tommies of St. Thomas. Since moving up from the Division III level prior to the start of the 2021-22 season, the team's overall and conference record has improved in every single year. They won 20 games last year, and they were 61st in terms of points scored on a per-possession basis last season, and they really slowed it down. 359th in terms of possessions per game out of your 362 Division I teams, but they are going to need to do a little bit better on the interior. 290th in the country in terms of opponents' two-point shooting percentage, while ranking 59th actually in turnovers forced on a per-play basis. They do lose a lot of their top guys from a season ago, but Kendall Blue was able to log about 10.5 points, 4 boards per contest is back, along with Ben Now, who I really liked. He was able to shoot about 36.5% from three-point range. Richie Beyer, he was over at UW Green Bay. He was able to give the team 6 points, 3 boards. He was a 6'8" combo player that shot it at about 33% from three-point range. He's going to be a key for this team as well, but for St. Thomas, the fact that you are going to be losing so many of those guys that were just so critical for this offense, like a Parker Jorkland, and they're going to be undersized. They really needed his rebounding a lot for Raheem Anthony, who was able to give the team about 12 points, 5 rebounds per game. Brooks Allen being out of the fold as well. They do lack a lot of size, so they're going to be very undersized, and I do think that that's going to put them into a little bit of a sticky situation. So as a result, we've got the Tommies at number 4 in terms of my projector finish. At number 3, I'm going to be going with North Dakota State. North Dakota State has been terrible on defense the last few seasons. They were 337th in the country in terms of points allowed on a per-possession basis, and that was despite the fact that opponents only grabbed 19.8% of their missed shots as an offensive rebound in home games. That was 8th in home defensive rebound rate last season, but they're going to be losing guys like an Andrew Morgan that were rock solid down low. But what I love about this team is backcourt. You bring back Damari Wheeler-Thomas, 10.5 points, 2.5 assists, shot 37% from three-point range. Jakari White was 34th among qualifying Division I players last year on three-point shooting percentage, shooting a whopping 45.5% from three-point range, 10.5 points, 4 boards per contest. JVS Miller shot 40% from 3, 8.5 points per contest, and now you bring in Brendan Watkins, who was a part of a VMI team that played the Olay style of defense last year, but 15 points, 3 assists per game, shot 37% from three-point range. Luke Kazabuke, he was over at Illinois State the last few seasons, shot about 36% from 3, 7 points per contest as well. And then Indiana State's Mason Miller shot 40.5% from three-point range. Again, the size down low is pretty much non-existent, but you've got Noah Fredersen, who was able to shoot about 39% from 3, 7.5 points, 4 boards per contest with 9.6 points, 5.1 boards, and shot 40.7% from three-point range in the last 13 games last season. Felt like North Dakota State was finding their bearings towards back half of the season. Front court is going to be terrible for this team, but that backcourt, I absolutely love what they provide in the backcourt. As a result, I've got this team number 3 towards my projector or finish. And number 2, I'm going to be going with UMKC. UMKC was really able to make some inroads in this conference last year, despite the fact that they were without Anderson Kopp. Anderson Kopp was a transfer from Lamar. He's going to be a Van Wilder 2.0 in college basketball. I think that this is going to be his 6th year of college basketball. And prior to him going down, he was really the guy that was doing a little bit of everything from UMKC, and that really thrusted Jamar Brown into sort of the do-it-all sort of role. As when Anderson Kopp was out there for the 10 games that he was last season, 13 points, 5 boards, 3 assists, only shot about 30% from three-point range. But if you look at his career numbers, this is a guy that's able to light it up from three-point range. As previous year for UMKC, shot 44% from 3 on 6.3 threes per per contest, and Jabbar Brown just stuffed the stat sheet last year. 15 points, 6 boards, was able to chip in there and steal. Only shot about 33% from 3, so if you can get Anderson Kopp to shooting in the mid-30s from 3-point range, that's big, but you've got Cameron Foss as well. For Foss, he was able to shoot 38.5% from distance, chipped in there 9 points, 4.5 rebounds per game. Love what he's able to bring to the table. They are going to be losing some of their low-post players from a season ago, as you had Allen, David, and Becca was able to do a solid job of being able to provide a lot of rebounding, and I'm not sure why he didn't get more run last season, but Melvin Ikangboli, he was able to give the team about 4 boards per contest, made 22 starts last season. Then you bring in Gobe along with Kashim Grady II, who are honorable mentions according to JUCOrecruiting.com, and their top 100 junior college level transfers. As for Gobe, he was able to log about 12.5 points, 4 assists, 1.5 steals per contest for helping out a core that is 13th in the country from a season ago in terms of defensive rebound rate. He was over at Howard College last season, and you've got a guy in Kashim Grady who was able to log about 14 points, 5 boards, shot 38.5% from 3-point range at the junior college level a season ago as well. I absolutely love what this team is able to provide in the backcourt. Again, they're going to be losing a little bit of that front court from a season ago, but I do think that having a pair of guys in Kopp and Brown that are able to stuff the stat sheet, a lot of these teams towards the top of the conference. I've got UMKC number 2 in terms of my projector finish, and at number 1, maybe I'm just a schmuck, but I'm going to be going South Dakota State. South Dakota State is going to be losing a lot from last year, including one Mr. Mayo, who was, well, he was the glue of the team from a season ago. He was a Mayo that held all things together from a season ago, as Zeke Mayo was able to log about 18.5 points per contest, and you also lose so many of these guys like a Charlie Easley from a season ago, so now the onus is on Kalen Gary, who was a part-time starter from last season, to be able to pick it up. 7.5 points, 3.5 rebounds per game, but in Coach Henderson, I am going to trust here. This was a perimeter defense that was 286th in the country, allowing opponents to shoot 35.5% from 3-point range, while 46.9% of opponents' field goal attempts were from 3-point range, but I think that they're going to be able to improve upon that, and this team is going to have a lot of size, which they haven't had in past years. Nate Bernhardt, he's a true 7-footer, was glued to the bench a little bit more last year, 3.5 points, about 2.3 rebounds per game. I think that he's going to be able to step up. Matthew Moores is someone that began his career over at Wisconsin, and he is the only other player other than Bernard and Gary that averaged more than 2 points per contest last season. But Oscar Clough, I think that he's going to be able to really step up after he was able to average 7 points, 4.5 boards, made 23 starts for Washington State a season ago. Isaac Lindsey is going to be able to bolster that backcourt. He spent last 4 years on Wisconsin's bench. I think that he's going to be able to come in right away, become a nice go-to scorer. We have seen it time and time again with the Henderson system, being able to find 3-point shooting. South Dakota State consistently, year in and year out, they're a top 50 team in terms of their 3-point shooting percentage. I think that they're going to be able to find that once again here. Recognize that the roster looks a little bit bare with South Dakota State, but I'm going to trust in this Eric Henderson system. Maybe I'm a schmuck for pain, but South Dakota State, my number 1 team out there in the Summit League, and that'll wrap things up for the Summit League Conference Preview Edition right here on Coast to Coast Hoops, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. If you do like hearing from this fine podcast, Coast to Coast Hoops, you're able to subscribe wherever your podcast, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. If you have a question, comment, segment, idea, what have you for this podcast, you have one of 2 ways to be able to fire those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at unit_D1. Keep in mind, letters EM, they mean does not matter, so as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. Otherwise, find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. From there, you are able to fire in whatever you'd like here on this podcast, find that 5-star review, and a big thanks to our good friend Sean Paul, who does such great work over at the Field of 68. He joined me in the last segment, coming at you guys every single day on this fine podcast, and I'll be back with you once again tomorrow. Thank you.